Hello lads, welcome back to Kickback Garage. Now today in this little video I want to talk about lambretta adjustable rear shocks. I want to tell you what type of rider needs adjustable rear shocks, and I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison between the BGM and the Chiselspeed rear shock, and I'm going to tell you which one of those I prefer of the pair and the reasons why. So grab yourself a coffee and I'll send the scooter over. Well, now the big question is, who really needs an adjustable rear shock for their lambretta? And the simple and quick answer to that is if you are riding with luggage, a passenger, you have a tuned engine, because as soon as you start getting 20 plus horsepower on your lambretta, then the rear shock has to battle against quite a bit of compression when you pull the throttle. And if you're a rally going scooterist, or you like to have people on the back of your scooter, then that's a good idea. Or if you're a fat bugger like me, then that's also a good idea, because the standard shocks, they do work really quite well for normal riding. But as soon as you've put one of those parameters in there, like more weight, more power, then it's really nice to have a little bit of adjustability, basically because they can be a little bit boingy, a little bit springy, either overdamped or underdamped, and it's nice to be able to adjust the rear shock there. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the BGM rear shock and the Chiselspeed rear shock. And Mr. Steel Weasel, the cheeky bugger, he just made a video where he tells you about setting up sag and compression and preload on your spring, and that was something I was going to do here. And he saved me a job there. Thank you, buddy. That's really kind of you. So if you haven't seen that video, run over to Steel Weasel. After this one, not before. Run over to Steel Weasel and have a ganj at that one there as well. That's pretty interesting, really, because I think most, to be honest, most scooterists, they just fit stuff on the scooter and don't adjust it in properly. But my day job, I thought I'd tell you this, my real day job is I'm a suspension technician. So I'm really clued up on how to do this, and I'm a bit anal when it comes to setting up my shocks. Right, so at the moment there are, I think, really 3 or maybe 4 main adjustable rear suspension shocks you can go for. We've got, as I say, the Chiselspeed and the BGM. But you've also got, is it Lupo or something like that? Really expensive. I think you're talking about 700 quid or something like that for a rear shocker. And the amount of value that the BGM and Chiselspeed offer is pretty unbeatable, really, to tell you the truth. We're not on the track, so we don't really need that level of adjustability. And the last option is obviously the Scooter Boy option, which is fitting an R6 or an R1 Yamaha rear shock. I think the shock length on those is 295 or something like that, which is pretty close to standard Series 3 lambretta, which is 300 millimeters long. But the problem with fitting the R1 shocks is not just the fact that you have to have special bushes, and there are some people that make those still, so you still can get all of those, but you really have to respring it at least. And I used to use those in the past, but I found them really harsh, because the compression damping in those shocks is very firm, because the R6 and the R1 I think are linkage bikes, whereas the lambretta principle of suspension is very basic, and it's just like a single pivot design. So really, single pivot designs, they should have progressive shocks, whereas the ones on the R1 and R6 are quite linear. So I don't really like those. But yeah, as a scooter boy upgrade, you used to be able to get them quite cheap, but when people found out you could fit those on Series 3s, then the prices actually skyrocketed on new shocks as well. Right, I thought I'd explain just very briefly on how you set up your rear shock. If you have an adjustable shock, then you can adjust the preload and you can adjust the compression. Now this sounds all difficult, but it's quite easy. I'm going to explain that a little bit in detail later on. But when the scooter is off the stand, the shock should sag down a certain amount, and that is called static sag. And when you sit on the scooter, or me in this case, then you get something called rider sag. And rider sag and static sag combined, and those two combined sags should measure 30% of your shock travel, not length, but travel. And traditionally, Series 3s, they have around 7 centimeters of travel. And Series 2s, this is why they ride better. With Series 2s, they traditionally have actually 8 centimeters of travel. So you've got an extra centimeter of travel there to play with. So if you're setting up, I'll take an example here. So if you're setting up 8 centimeter shock, then you should really have somewhere around the region of just under 3 centimeters or 30 millimeters of static and rider sag. A little bit less on Series 3 because it's got less travel. And there I would recommend somewhere around the 2 centimeter mark, maybe a little bit less. I think Steel Weasel Steve there, he uses 1.5, but he's such a light, feather light fella that he probably can't get any more than that. It was just a little dig at you there, Steve. I'm only joking, mate. I'm jealous. So, what I have found is, if you remember, last year I actually upgraded my forks on this scooter here, little Touareg, because when I was out riding I had such a really strange undulating feeling on the fork, and I overhauled it, changed the springs, put new dampers on there, and there was absolutely no difference whatsoever. So what I found out is that the rear shock that I had on at the time was misbehaving basically, and it wasn't really able to keep up with the undulation of asphalt. So if I was hitting something like small ripples or a washboard on the asphalt that we get here over in Norway because of the harsh winters we have, then it was like bucking a little bit and unsteady in the fork. So that was a bit disconcerting, really. And after a lot of faffing around, I found out that all these shocks come like this. So that's probably a combination with how I like to set them up, and probably also a combination with the fact that I weigh a little bit more than average. I'm actually about 14 stone, which is horrible, I know. And if I set up my suspension for me, and then my son jumped on, Shrek, he weighs in the region of about 60 kilos, which is what? Almost half my weight. He weighs about 8 stone or something. 9 stone. That would have been 9 stone, I reckon. And he was just feeling the same as well, even though he's a lighter rider. Now, the reason for that is when I set the sag how I want it, and I set the spring preload how I wanted it, I really had to ramp up the compression on the BGM shock. And what I found is when you wind on the compression on the BGM shock, it slows down the rebound damping too much. So what was happening there is that when I set it up, as I say, how I like it, then it was compressing on the bumps, but it didn't have the rebound set fast enough for the wheel to follow the downover bumps, if you like. And it was just getting shorter and shorter, and it starts bucking. and undulating the front of the scooter, which is really unnerving. And what I thought I'd do would, before I take it off here, because I bought a new shock, before I take it off this, I thought I'd show you what it's like, how slow it is when I set it up, how I want it set up. Right, as you see, this is, hang on a second, you don't see anything. Right, as you see here, lads, this is the BGM shock. I have set it with the correct preload on the spring. This is, by the way, a 110-pound spring, which is pretty normal for a slightly stiff ride. Yeah. So if I sit my bum down on the scooter, you'll see that I have exactly 2 centimeters of sag on that thing. The only problem is that because I have quite a bit of preload, I've got a whole 4 turns on there. The problem being is that it's now made the shock really quick. You can see that. So it just makes it a bit too quick, and that means that if I'm driving over bumps and stuff on the road, then it means that is just going to buck and jump and skip and hop. So I ramp up the preload, the compression, and what I find is the problem with this shock, it might be because I'm slightly over average, but these really should work 2 up as well, if you ask me. This shock, by the way, is 9 months old. So I put it on the position I prefer. Let's go. And because when you adjust the compression, you're also adjusting the rebound. I don't think that the rebound and the compression go up at the same sort of speed, if you get my drift. They're not exactly parallel. So when I get to the position I want to adjust my shock at, it really slows down the shock on rebound. You can see if I lift my bum quick, my bum goes up way before the shock goes up. So that's really annoying. So that's why my scooter has been undulating like crazy. And I have the opposite problem as well. So if I go like in between, halfway in between, I don't have to take it off that many clicks really. Then it speeds up the shock faster than it takes off the compression damping. So that means that it's way too fast again. So I'm having a real problem trying to set this up. And funny thing is, on the Series 1, both me and Shrek ride that all the time, back to back. We swap rides, and that the only thing I need to do there is 3 clicks on the compression damping, and it suits my riding style really good. So what I'll do now, I'll take this BGM shock off and I'll fit the Chiselspeed shock, and I'll show you the difference between them after I've fit it. Right, so this is the Chiselspeed shock. This is a billet aluminium CNC machine job. It's weighs about the same as the BGM shock, but it's slightly, quite a lot lighter than the original OEM type lambretta shock. Things to note with this is it's the same thickness on the outer diameter of the spring, so that it doesn't interfere with your mudguard. So if you can see there, you can see that I've had something there scraping along. I think that's a BGM shock, but I can't be 100% sure there actually. It might be the shock that was on the scooter before I bought it, so I just can't remember, to tell you the truth. But anyway, that's one to watch there. And the nice thing about this one is I've only put a couple of rounds of preload on the spring, and I'm going to show you how the compression damping works on this one compared to the BGM. And this is also now I got all the technical specs. It's twin tube. They've got how the valves are built up and all that sort of stuff, but I really don't want to bore you with that. So that's sort of in my head. I love that sort of stuff. But this is actually slightly more advanced, and if anything, I think that they've got the settings on the way that the compression works and the rebound together really dialed in. The reason why I've noticed that this was a better shock is because when I was riding the Shrekmobile, the Series 1, which has one of these incidentally, it was the superior ride. It was much more controlled. It's not quite as stiff, and because I've got a Series 2, the Series 2 shock from Chiselspeed is not adjustable like in length like the BGM shock. So this one actually has the advantage of it's got an extra centimetre of rear wheel travel, so you've got more to play with. So on this I can actually have 2.5 centimetres of sag, and it feels really nice. Right, so I'll take her off the stand here and I'll show you how the compression damping works on this one. Right, so this is the Chiselspeed shock with the compression damping fully off. I've got my 2.5 centimetres of sag there, and if I bump on it, you see it's really quite bouncy. What that means is that when the compression setting is completely out, then the rebound is quite fast. The difference between this and the BGM shock is the fact that the compression and rebound, they adjust themselves at the same rate. So that means it doesn't matter where you have it in the compression adjustment range, the rebound will be matched. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So either this spring is more burly, or it's set up for more burly riders like me and maybe people who have a passenger or a lot of luggage on a rally. I only need about, let me count this. I only need about 4 clicks of compression there to stiffen it up enough for me. Now, if you keep an eye on the spring there, when I lift up my bum, then you'll see that the spring doesn't, the shock doesn't come back really slowly. So let's give it a go up. So I reckon the rebound on that is really good, because that means I am following the bumps in the road and it's not bucking me off. And the fact that I can have more sag on this means that it makes for a more comfortable ride. Another nice thing about this shock is that it's progressive in the way that the valving works. So that means that if you hit a really nasty pothole, which bottoms out your suspension, it gets gradually harder to the end of the suspension travel. So that translates into no bum jarring or back jarring jolts, but it also means that when you accelerate fast and brake fast, you don't get the ducking and diving that you would do on a standard type shock. It really does follow the road really well. So if I ramp up the compression damping more, it'll give me more rebound. But the interesting thing, like I said, is that on this one, is that when I turn that all the way up, it doesn't affect the rebound so much that it just goes really slow and really stiff. So yeah, I really rate this, as you might understand by now. But let me grab myself a coffee, and I want to talk to you about the prices and stuff like that. specs and prices. Right, before I give you some facts and figures on these shocks, I just have to point out that this is the second BGM shock I've had. Shrek's scooter started off with a BGM shock, but my shock, the shock that I had on here, it started leaking. So what I did was I bought a Chiselspeed shock for the Shrek mobile, and I fit his on mine, and that's only, like I said, it's probably about 9 months old. So and both these shocks performed in exactly the same manner. So I was thinking that it was misbehaving because it was duff, but when I changed the shock to the newer one that was on Shrek's, then it just shows that they worked in exactly the same way. So that could be something because I'm a porker. But seriously, if you're too up on that and you put some extra compression and extra spring preload on it, it's going to make the rear end really, really slow on the rebound, very, very stiff on the compression, and it just doesn't follow the road like it should do. And in the case of that, I'd actually say an original or even Escort type rear shock would probably work a lot better. But anyway, let me give you some facts and figures. I've written them down here somewhere. There we go. Right. The BGM adjustable rear shock, that costs £195 today. If you want to rebuild that shock, then they don't offer kits that you can buy, so you can take it to your local dealer to rebuild. I see there's a nitrogen port on there, so there's obviously nitrogen in there as well. So something you can't really, an average Joe can't really rebuild in his home. Now, I talked to BGM about some front shocks. I tried to get a rebuild kit for, and they were really struggling to find that. But they did say that if I sent it in, that they could refurbish them for me. But I didn't get hold of the price how much that would cost. So that's something to consider as well. Another thing, which is a feature or a not so good feature, it depends on where you come from, but the BGM shock is one size fits all. So what that means is if you've got a series 1 or 2 which use 310mm rear shock, then you can adjust the length of the shock so that suits your machine. And if you have a series 3 which uses a 300mm shock, then you can shorten that. The back side of the coin there is actually that you actually lose, if you've got a series 2, you're going to be losing a full centimetre of rear wheel travel there. So that could be also why it feels a little bit harsh on the series 2, maybe. I don't know. You decide. The Chiselspeed shock, today's price is $155. I talked to the lads who make these shocks, and they will fully rebuild, fully refurbish the shock for £30, and that is a steal. So basically, if you buy the Chiselspeed shock, then you've got a shock for life. I mean, if you send that in every other year or something like that, then 30 quid, that's really cheap. As I said, I work as a suspension technician, and yeah, we charge about 150 quid for a shock rebuild. The other thing with the Chiselspeed is that it's got a fixed length. So if you've got a series 3, then you need to buy the 300mm length shock. If you've got a series 2, then you get the 310mm length shock. Nice thing about that, like I said, is got an extra centimetre of travel. And if you're a real rally-going scooterist or have something like a snail pipe, like Shrek has on the Shrek mobile, then you can actually buy a 315mm shock. The only thing to watch there is if you've got tuned engine with a reed valve, then it might interfere with the frame in the 315mm length. Sebastian, Mr. Shrek, has got the 315 on his series 1, and that is because we had some dragging issues on the asphalt with his exhaust pipe. And I'm glad to say that fitting that shock there didn't mean that his manifold, even though it's got a revalve, he has the BGM kit on there, his manifold doesn't interfere with the frame with that length, and it makes for an exceptionally comfortable ride. Right, well, that means I can conclude the video with the Chiselspeed shock is cheaper, but you have to buy it in the specific length for your scooter. So if you're swapping that around between series 1s and 3s, it's not going to work. It's fully rebuildable, and it works really well. And as I tried to explain, is when you ramp up the rebound or when you turn up more compression, then the rebound is adjusted parallel to the compression. What that means is if you stiffen up the compression on it, it speeds up the rebound, so it feels the same even though it's stiffer. So heavier riders are really going to get some enjoyment out of that one. The BGM shock, I really quite shocked at how poor that is, to tell you the truth. It costs £50 more almost than the Chiselspeed shock. Now, both these shocks I have paid out of my own money, and I seriously have to sell that shock before I release this video. But if you're a lighter rider, then you probably won't get the same problem that I did. But if you're a pokier rider like me, or you like to ride with rallies with lots of gear, or you ride quite often 2-up, then seriously consider the Chiselspeed over the BGM, I reckon, is what I've got to conclude with there. Because as you saw, when you turn up the compression damping on the BGM shock, it's almost like it doubles or halves the speed of the rebound. So if you're a poker like me, you turn up, you need quite a few clicks of compression damping, then it just means that it slows the shock really down. It gives such a harsh feeling scooter. It might feel a little bit more sporty, but if you hit something like a small washboard or a ripple in the tarmac, then the front wheel, it just packs itself down. It doesn't get time to spring back to its full length, and then you're not utilizing the sag that you set up on the rear shock either. So the rear wheel just isn't following the ground like it should, and it skips and hops, and it's a little bit terrifying, to tell you the truth. And like I said, I had issues when I was using that shock that it was hopping and skipping. I wasn't really thinking about the rear shock, but it did really translate into the front of the scooter, because it was nosediving the front of the scooter. So yeah, quite surprising really. So the next video I'll be doing will definitely be on the TV 175. I did plan on doing that today, but because I got a free day, which is the first one for 3 weeks, which is quite amazing really, but I'm missing the frame cones. But I've ordered frame cones from my good friends over at Scootopia, so they should come next week. I've already got a message that they sent. So I'll put the side case on the engine and fit the cowl, fit the engine, and fit the wheel to the engine in the frame. And I'm also hoping to fit the brake pedal and brake light switch, cables, wires, yeah, cooking on gas. So that next one should be an interesting one. So don't forget, lads, give me the old thumbs up, do the old subscribe, share my videos as well, and big shout out to Steel Weasel there. If you want to know how to set up your sag properly, then go over to his video there. He'll show you exactly how to do it, and he does it exactly the same way that I do, but he sets it up with slightly less sag, because he's on a Series 3, which has got less travel, if you get my gist. Anyway, I'll stop waffling and I'll bugger off. See you later, lads. Ta-ra.